Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 17th of December of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. First, we're going to talk just a few words about the process of mobilization in Ukraine. As you know, the process is very difficult. We have another video somewhere from the western part of Ukraine where another F-16 pilot or person who wanted to become F-16 pilot realized at some point that there are no places for him, just the driver of something like Bradley. So he was very disappointed, as you can see. Another F-16 pilot probably was found somewhere in Kiev. So the situation is very difficult in this area, and we see the rise of negative situation, of negative attitude of the Ukrainians to the Ukrainian authorities. Furthermore, as we know, once again, that Ukrainians adopted another law about the upcoming total mobilization. There are a few things that we have already discussed, that they're planning to reduce the level. The age will be lowered from 27 to 25, and that women also will be required to register for military service. So we'll see, because once again the Russians today told that there are going to be no peace agreement with Ukrainians, just capitulation. Now we are moving not to the ground. Very interesting updates are coming from the borderlands between Sumy and Kursk and Belgrade area. For example, the Ukrainian sources are saying, just a few things about this territory. The Ukrainian sources are saying that the Russians intensified their activity in Sumy area. You know that when talking about the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, the Russians are saying that there are few front lines like Kupiansk, Liman, Donetsk, South Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson area. But there is another front line. Probably it's seventh front line, and this is the area between Chernihiv and Sumy, the area where every single day the Russians are sending more and more commanders and scouts for reconnaissance operations, for some sabotage operations, so on, and the Ukrainians have losses every single day. But we don't know this number, and as I understand, the number is very heavy. Few examples about this situation. This is, for example, the picture after another Russian attack somewhere in Chernihiv area. Another checkpoint somewhere in the border was captured by the Russians. The few Ukrainian soldiers were killed, and maybe some important information was stolen by the Russians as well. This is the first area. The second thing, if you remember, just yesterday we discussed that the Russians managed to capture 6 Ukrainian servicemen on the border. They didn't kill them. They took a decision to surrender, or the Russians have a plan to capture, let's say, like a live soldier but not dead one. And these guys were saying that Ukrainians, you need to surrender and so on, blah blah blah. And today we start receiving very interesting updates from the borderlands between Sumy and Kursk and Belgrade area. The first update we got yesterday in the evening, and according to information we have, the Ukrainians, for the first time since the beginning of the special military operation, since the beginning of any clashes on the borderlands, start bombing the Russian positions with cluster rounds. And this is very interesting because it's not like something, it's like unique type of weapon. The Ukrainians try to save these cluster rounds as much as possible, or to use this type of weapon somewhere in Bakhmut or Avdiivka, but not to waste a cluster round somewhere in the borderlands or something like this. And that was the first weird thing I read during the day. So the Ukrainians start bombing the residential area. As you can see, this video was made from some settlement on the Russian border, and that settlement was under bombardments of cluster rounds. And the second interesting update we got for today, that somewhere at 1 p.m. of the local time, there were very heavy clashes in the city by the name of Terebrina. So it was like a fight between Ukrainian commanders and scout group against the Russian forces. And mainly updates were coming from the Russian sources saying that Ukrainians tried to enter with reconnaissance team, with commandos team. They were discovered, and as a result of counterattack, that team was encircled, captured, or even the Ukrainians were forced to step back. But the most strange and weird thing that these updates were published by the Russian forces. So it doesn't fit in my mind. Like yesterday, the Ukrainians bombed this territory with cluster rounds, and today the Ukrainians sent reconnaissance team. So what is the purpose? So by using these cluster rounds, first of all, you're discovering your enemy plans. You're not using like cluster rounds, heavy bombardments like artillery operation, and then you're sending like reconnaissance team. You're not doing like this. We can say that maybe the Ukrainians were planning to enter the Russian territory, but it's also not true, because once again, the Russians intensified their actions along the borders with Sumy area, and they captured a lot of Ukrainian soldiers. There are a lot of losses among the Ukrainians. There are very heavy clashes. The Russians are able to dig in deeper, very deep inside of Ukrainian territory, which means that Ukrainians don't have a normal defense belt in Sumy area. And something tells me that the Russians probably wanted themselves to attack Ukraine from Sumy area. And all the events and activity of Russian commanders and scouts groups and reconnaissance group tells me that the Russians probably concentrated some certain amount of forces on the borders with Sumy, and the things that Ukrainians started bombing the Russians with cluster rounds tells me that Ukrainians somehow probably managed to discover the concentration of Russian forces, and they start bombing them. And after that attack, the Ukrainians made recco in combat, trying to understand and trying to to find the evidence of Russian presence in this area. Not like few soldiers or FSB groups or like few territory defense forces. The Ukrainian reconnaissance team was sent in this area to find Russian army. And as I understand, they found Russian army, and of course, all the things I'm telling you might be just as regular speculations, but something tells me that the Russians were planning or are planning to launch an offensive operation with the purpose to cut the main road between Sumy and Kharkiv, and they were planning to do this very soon, like the day after tomorrow, during the next few weeks or something like this. So let's wait, let's see, but something tells me that soon we're going to receive more updates exactly from Sumy area on the border between Sumy and Kursk and Belgorod. Another important thing, as you know, during the previous days and today, the Ukrainian source authorities reported that Ukrainians took a decision to build 3 defense belt in Ukraine, like on the border with Russia, like the first defense belt in this area till Kharkiv. Then the Ukrainians are planning to build the second defense belt in the same regions like Chernigov, Sumy, Poltava area, and the third defense belt. Now we have updates about cluster rounds, reconnaissance teams. The Russians captured some border servicemen and so on. So everything tells us that the Russians do have plans to start offensive operation in Chernigov and Sumy, and that they're going to do this very soon. And I have just one question: when the Russians are going to do this year or maybe in the beginning of the next one? And the second thing, whether the Ukrainians are able to prepare defense belt before the Russians attacks, because there are very high chances that the Ukrainians are not going to build everything in time. And from this perspective, for example, Avdiivka offensive operation and let's say Sinkovka Kupiansk offensive operation have a completely different meaning, because the main purpose of Avdiivka operation and Kupiansk operation is not maybe probably to encircle Avdiivka or to capture Sinkovka and Kupiansk, but the Russians probably have the same goal as the Ukrainians have. And I'm talking about to reduce as much as possible the Ukrainian forces, to reduce them so much so the Ukrainians will not be able to redeploy some reserves to Chernigov and to Sumy area. And this is the reason why the Ukrainians are trying to be so fast with mobilization, because they understand if the Russians attacks, let's say from Belarus or from Chernigov, basically they don't have forces to stop any Russian progress. Now let's move to the situation on the ground, and first we're going to talk about Kherson direction. According to information we have, as a result of clashes in this area, the Ukrainians lost 95 soldiers, 13 armored vehicles including 1 tank and 4 artillery systems. The Russians continue storming and attacking Kinky, trying to discover the Ukrainian main artillery positions, fire positions, FPV drone positions. The Russians use for these purposes like reconnaissance operations, like reconnaissance in force or in combat. This is another episode of Russian reconnaissance operation when they entered Kinky with tanks that were attacked by the Ukrainians. By that, the Russians managed to discover the Ukrainian positions, and after that the Russians bombed this territory heavily. But anyway, no changes on the ground, just few sources reported that the Russians managed to advance a little bit on the southwestern part of Kinky and to establish control over a few more streets and buildings. Yet we haven't received any geolocated confirmation of that. Now we are moving to Zaporizhzhia area, and we have a lot of very interesting updates from this territory. First of all, the situation in this area is very difficult for many reasons, and first is that Ukrainians, as we discussed, have redeployed significant number of very powerful forces from this area, and the second reason is the poor quality of everything, of weather, of ground, of equipment. On this video we see how the Ukrainians sank another artillery system somewhere in Zaporizhzhia area, and as you can see, this is the artillery system that Ukrainians need to use against the Russian offensive operation. Obviously, for now, for some period of time, this artillery system is no longer are available for the use. Also, from another video we see how the Ukrainians probably were trying to send some reinforcement also somewhere among the fields in Zaporizhzhia area, but they basically stuck. And obviously on this video we don't see what happened next, but as I understand, the Ukrainians basically abandoned these armored vehicles and left the fields because there were very high chances that the Russians would attack them with FPV drones. But maybe they were lucky because the Russians mainly were focused on the south of Robotyne. Today the Russian FPV drone squad Babry published significant number of FPV drone strikes from the main trenches on the south of Robotyne. Mainly the Russians were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian fortifications, the Ukrainian trenches. So obviously we can say that the Russians launched FPV drone preparation before the next attempt, before the next wave of attack in direction of Robotyne. As you can see, significant number of videos, and the main idea, the Russians were attacking and were hunting the Ukrainian forces, and the most important that on these videos we will not see Ukrainian infantry. They were hiding, obviously, or trying to hide themselves from these strikes from the drones. So anyway, as we discussed, currently this are no longer Bradley Square or Robotyne Cauldron or Salient. This is Robotyne Cake. And as I understand, according to geolocations, the next piece of cake that the Russians are planning to cut is the southern part of Robotyne. So the Russians will try to cut this huge piece of cake, and after that they will get as close as possible to village itself, and probably the next Russian attempts, goals will be to start the battle, the second battle for the village itself. According to the Ministry of Defense, as a result of clashes on this direction, the Ukrainians lost 50 soldiers, 4 armored vehicles including 1 tank and 3 artillery systems. Now we are moving to the South Donetsk direction. We haven't received anything during the day, just one geolocated video of those flamethrower strikes and just bombardments of the eastern part. Yet the Russians haven't entered the eastern part of Novomikhailivka, but I expect that very soon they're going to do this, or they're going to make first reconnaissance in force or reconnaissance in combat operations. We got some updates about some Russian progress on the south of this village, but yet without any geolocated confirmation. When talking about Marinka area, Krasnogorovka, this Krasnogorovka, we got few updates. The Russians also continue bombardments with FPV drone the northwestern part of Marinka, which also confirms Russian goals and Russian plans to complete the clearing of this village very soon, within the next few days. And another video we got from Krasnogorovka. When talking about Krasnogorovka, the story is very interesting. According to information we have, recently the Ukrainians have redeployed 46 Air Mobile Brigade in this area, and now 46 Brigade is responsible just for the northern part of Marinka. Let's mark this area on the map. It's everything softly. So for example, this territory of this front line is under responsibility of a 46 Air Mobile Brigade. The area to the north in the vicinity of Nivoyska is under responsibility of 59th Motorized. The area to the south, this one, is under responsibilities of 79th Brigade. This is Победа, Novobakhmutovka, and so on. This is 79th Air Assault Brigade. And the thing is that 46th Air Mobile Brigade is new to this area. They are not familiar with the front line. So when they were redeployed, the Ukrainian authorities probably gave them some places to live, to have some stuff. And this is Krasnogorovka. And the Russians managed to discover the main positions, the main base of 46th Brigade. And that brigade was under very heavy fire. So I will not be surprised to hear, if we receive some updates that 46th Brigade within the next few weeks will lose their combat capabilities due to significant losses from the Russian army. Now we're moving to the north. We have very interesting geolocations to the east of Nivoyska. On this video we see how the Russian forces were bombing the tree lines, and the video is very interesting because this territory used to be under Russian control. At least at the beginning of this year, these tree lines was under the Russians, but as I understand, during the Ukrainian counter-offensive operation that took place the previous summer, the Ukrainians managed to force the Russians to step back, and they returned control over the fields on the east of Nivoyska. So this is the situation about this territory. Now we are moving to Avdiivka. We haven't received almost anything, just the Ministry of Defense report. According to that report, the Ukrainians lost 250 soldiers, 9 armored vehicles, and 3 artillery systems. But you may say that there are lots of icons to the north of Avdiivka. Yes, there are a lot of icons, but almost every single one of them is another killed or wounded Russian soldier. I must say that no matter regarding the situation, regarding the Russian progress, let's say in Krynky, in Zaporizhzhia, South Donetsk, Novomikhailivka, maybe even southern part of Avdiivka, the Russian progress in Bakhmut, and maybe even Kupiansk, Liman, when talking about chemical plant, Stepova, this is the nightmare for the Russian soldier. I don't want to lie, I don't want to reduce the values of this. This is the nightmare. This is the nightmare, and every single video, almost every single video in this territory, every single icon is another killed Russian soldier. Just significant number of losses. The Russians can't dig in deeper. The Russians can't force the Ukrainians to step back, but they're always counterattack. They're always making another attack, but every single one of them failed, and most of the attacks that the Russians tried to do here was repelled by the Ukrainians. I can't open this video. If you have access to the map, you can feel free, you can watch every single one, but the scenes are very shocking. Now we are moving to the north in direction of Bakhmut Artyomovsk direction, where we got also significant number of geolocations. The Russians continue improving their positions in the vicinity of Bogdanovka. As a result of offensive operation, the Russians capture a few more trenches and fortifications in the vicinity of Khromova, between Popovsky Forest, Bogdanovka, Khromova, the road 0506. On this video we see how the Russians were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions with FPV drones. After that, the Russians cleared this territory with infantry. So before the next video, we will update this map because this territory is under complete Russian control, and we have a real geolocation of that. Furthermore, we got very interesting updates from the southern direction. As we discussed, the Ukrainians are losing their positions. The Russians capture significant number of prisoners of war. We discussed this during the previous time. So this front line has been almost collapsed and fall from the Ukrainian side. And the interesting updates, interesting video we also got from this territory, and I would like to discuss this video with you. Because, you know, there are a lot of, let's say, experienced FPV drone operators, either from the Russian and from the Ukrainian side. And now we got the situation when it's not important to attack the forces, enemy forces with FPV drone strikes or to make professional bombardments. Yes, this is a very effective weapon, but now the most important, the most probably important type of forces currently is FPV drone intelligence. So this is type of forces whose main purpose is not to attack or kill, but to discover the position of FPV drone operators of enemy. On this video, we can see how the Russians were trying to make operation, trying to discover the FPV drone position of Ukrainian forces. On this video, we can see how the Ukrainians started their flying. This FPV drone was on the land. It's raised to the sky and started flying somewhere in Klishchiivka. And the Russians didn't attack this FPV drone, but they could do this, but they took a decision not to do. And they were following him from one position to another. This FPV drone arrived somewhere in Klishchiivka, probably brought some munition or medicines or cigarettes or food to Ukrainian soldiers on the ground, and then FPV drone start moving back to the original FPV operator position. And all this time the Russians were following him with another drone with night vision, and they followed this drone track, the direction of the drone. They managed to discover the landing area, and after that the information was transferred to artillery forces, and basically the entire area was reduced to ruins with very heavy weapon, maybe even missiles like Iskander. So if we return back to map, the Ukrainian let's say trip started somewhere here. They brought some reinforcements, munitions to Klishchiivka with a Baba Yaga FPV drone, and then they returned back in direction of Kalinovka, where the Russians managed to, and after that the Russians destroyed this territory with artillery fire. So very interesting video. Now we're moving further. We haven't received almost not anything from Solidar, just some improvements, unconfirmed improvements of the Russian forces in the vicinity of Fyodorovka. Liman, the same story. According to the Ministry of Defense, the Ukrainians lost 90 soldiers and 4 armored vehicles. And Kupiansk direction, we got a lot of interesting geolocations. And according to information we have, the Ukrainians lost 50 soldiers, 3 armored vehicles. But as you can see, we have a lot of geolocations. You know that Avdiivka is a very difficult situation, but probably Sinkovka and Kupiansk is even harder than Avdiivka, or at least they're like almost on the same level. There are very heavy clashes, there are very bloody clashes from both sides. And when talking about, for example, Avdiivka, the Ukrainians try to keep distance. In Avdiivka, there are no close combat, like in trenches, one soldiers against another soldiers. But when talking about Sinkovka, there is a situation with the close combat, like in meter, when soldiers fight with tanks in 1 meter. For example, today we got the video how the Russians, trying to keep and to save their foothold to the north of this village, sent another reinforcement, another reconnaissance or reinforcement group with stormtroopers, but the Ukrainians control this area because this is the only safe road that the Russians can use to send reinforcement. And as you can see, as a result of javelin strikes, both armored vehicles were destroyed. This is the only safe road that the Russians can use from Liman Pervy to land their infantry and to send infantry in Sinkovka. And obviously this road is under complete Ukrainian fire and they can destroy everything they can. But it doesn't mean that the Russians don't have forces in Sinkovka. For example, today was published a video how the Ukrainian tank was ruining the buildings in Sinkovka with tank. He was basically moving on another this or that building, trying to destroy the building to reduce to ruins. And also this video, for example, noted during the video that Ukrainians are trying to destroy buildings and not to allow the Russians to have some fortifications to dig in deeper. From one side, this is a very smart step. If the Ukrainians understand that they will be forced to step back, it's better to destroy every single building and not to allow the Russians to have a foothold. But I finished this video, watched this video till the end, and on this scene we can see how the Russian soldier left the ruined building. So the Ukrainian entered the building, ruined the building, and the Russian soldier managed to survive. So as you can see how close the battle and combat, at least in Sinkovka. Russian soldier in less than half meter, Ukrainian tank, so very close combat. It's remind me like Stalingrad of 1943, when there was a very big mass and something like this. So the battle for Sinkovka continues. It's a very heavy and bloody clashes there. For now, I can't tell you whether the Russians are winning or the Ukrainians, but when talking about the global things, I think that the Russians will win this battle just because of better supply and support and weapon they have, but the Ukrainians are in defense state. So we'll see what is going to be next. And that's it for today. Military Summer channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.